When the judge's gavel fell that Tuesday morning in September, I thought I was about to lose everything I'd worked for my entire life. My own family sat across the courtroom, their lawyers surrounding them like vultures, demanding my house, my business, even my late husband's tools from the garage. But they had no idea what was hidden in that manila envelope I clutched in my trembling hands. One document. That's all it took to turn their greed into handcuffs. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and 6 months ago, I was just a widow trying to keep my small accounting firm afloat, while grieving the loss of my husband Daniel. We'd built our life together in Portland, Oregon, far from the chaos of my family back in Chicago. Daniel used to joke that the 2,000 miles between us and my relatives was the secret to our happy marriage. If only he'd known how right he was. The trouble started 3 weeks after Daniel's funeral. I was still wearing black, still finding his coffee mug in the sink every morning before remembering he wasn't coming home. That's when my phone rang at 6 in the morning. My sister Carmen's voice cut through the silence of my empty house like a blade. "Rebecca, we need to talk. About the money." I should have hung up right then. Carmen had always been the manipulator of the family, the one who could twist any situation to her advantage. She'd married young to escape our chaotic household, but her husband left her with 3 kids and a mountain of debt. My brother Miguel wasn't much better. He'd burned through every opportunity our parents had given him, always expecting someone else to clean up his messes. "What money, Carmen? I told you at the funeral, Daniel and I lived modestly. The insurance barely covered the medical bills." "Don't play dumb with me, Rebecca. We know about inheritance. Grandma Elena's money, the money that was supposed to be divided between all of us." My blood ran cold. Grandma Elena had died when I was 15, and yes, she'd left money. But not the kind of money that would matter to anyone. A few $1,000s that our parents had used for her funeral expenses. At least, that's what they'd told us. "Carmen, that was 25 years ago. Whatever money Grandma left is long gone." "That's where you're wrong, sister. Miguel found some papers when he was helping Mom clean out the attic. Papers that show you've been hiding quite a bit from us." The line went dead, and I stood there in my kitchen, still holding the phone, watching the rain streak down the windows. Daniel had always warned me about keeping family at arm's length, but I'd dismissed his concerns. Blood is blood, I'd tell him. Family is family. Now, staring at my reflection in the dark glass, I realized how naive I'd been. 2 days later, Carmen showed up at my office. She didn't come alone. Miguel was with her, along with someone I didn't recognize, a sharp-dressed man with cold eyes, who introduced himself as their lawyer, Thomas Brennan. My small accounting firm suddenly felt very small indeed. "Rebecca, we're here to discuss the Elena Martinez estate," Brennan said, spreading documents across my desk like he owned the place. "It's come to our attention that there were significant assets that were never properly distributed to the heirs." I looked at the papers, photocopies of bank statements, property deeds, and legal documents I'd never seen before. The numbers made my head spin. According to these documents, my grandmother hadn't left a few $1,000s. She'd left nearly $500,000. "This is impossible," I whispered, scanning the papers. "Our parents would have told us." Carmen leaned forward, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Mom and Dad are getting old, Rebecca. Their memory isn't what it used to be. But we found these papers, and we found something else too. A safety deposit box key. And you know what we found in that box?" Miguel pulled out another document, a handwritten letter in what looked like my grandmother's shaky handwriting. The letter was addressed to me, specifically. In it, Grandma Elena explained that she'd set up a trust fund, and that she'd chosen me as the sole beneficiary because I was the only one who'd visited her regularly in the nursing home, the only one who'd cared about her as a person rather than what she could give. "She left everything to you, Rebecca. Everything. And you've been keeping it from us for 25 years. "That's not true," I said. But even as the words left my mouth, I felt a chill of uncertainty. Had my parents known about this? Had they deliberately kept it from me? I never received any inheritance. I never even knew about this trust. Brennan's smile was as sharp as a scalpel. Mrs. Martinez, the records show that the trust was established with clear instructions. You were named as the primary beneficiary, with distributions to begin on your 30th birthday. That was 15 years ago. The trust should have been distributing funds to you all this time. The room was spinning. I grabbed the edge of my desk to steady myself. I'm telling you, I never received a penny. I never even knew this existed. The bank records show otherwise, Carmen said, sliding another document across the desk. Regular deposits into an account bearing your name and social security number. Monthly deposits of $3,000 for the past 15 years. I stared at the bank statements. The account number was foreign to me. But there it was, my name, my social security number, and a balance that made my accounting background kick into overdrive. If these deposits had been happening for 15 years, this account should have over $500,000 in it. This isn't my account, I said firmly. I've never seen this bank, never opened this account. Someone is using my identity. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Martinez, Brennan said. Identity theft is a federal crime. Are you saying someone has been stealing from your family's inheritance for 15 years? The weight of the situation crashed down on me. Either I was lying about the inheritance, or someone had indeed been stealing from my family using my identity. Both scenarios painted me as the villain in this story. I need time to investigate this, I said, gathering the documents. I need to contact this bank, verify these accounts. Time is something we don't have much of, Carmen said, standing up. Miguel's behind on his mortgage, and I've got 3 kids to put through college. If this money has been sitting in an account for 15 years, we need it now. And if you've been keeping it from us, Miguel added, speaking for the first time since they'd arrived, we'll be forced to take legal action. After they left, I sat alone in my office, staring at the documents scattered across my desk. The rain had stopped, but the clouds remained, casting everything in a gray, uncertain light. I picked up the phone and dialed the bank listed on the statements. First National Trust and Savings, how can I help you? Hi, I need to inquire about an account. I believe someone may have opened an account using my personal information. I can help with that. What's the account number? I read the number from the statement, my hands shaking slightly. And your name? Rebecca Martinez. There was a pause, then the sound of typing. Mrs. Martinez, I see you calling about your trust distribution account. How can I assist you today? My heart sank. I'm calling because I believe this account was opened fraudulently. I never authorized this account. Ma'am, I'm showing that this account was opened 15 years ago, with proper identification and documentation. You've been receiving monthly distributions from the Elena Martinez Memorial Trust, as specified in the trust documents. But I never received any money. I never even knew about this account. According to our records, all distributions have been made according to the trust specifications. Monthly deposits of $3,000 have been made consistently for 15 years. The current balance is $47,892.34. My mind reeled. If monthly deposits of $3,000 had been made for 15 years, the account should have over $500,000. Where was the rest of the money? Can you tell me about the withdrawals from this account? I see regular withdrawals, Mrs. Martinez, large withdrawals. It appears you've been using this account quite actively. What kind of withdrawals? I'm seeing cash withdrawals, wire transfers, and several large purchases. The most recent was a wire transfer of $15,000 just last month. I felt sick. Someone had been using my identity not just to access my grandmother's inheritance, but to steal from my family for 15 years. And now my own siblings thought I was the thief. I need to come in person to discuss this account. There's been a mistake. Of course, Mrs. Martinez. We'll need to verify your identity, but we can certainly review the account with you. I hung up the phone and immediately called my lawyer, Sarah Chen, who'd helped Daniel and me with our wills and business documents. I explained the situation, and she agreed to meet me at the bank the next morning. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my grandmother, about the stories she used to tell me when I was little. She'd always said that family was the most important thing in the world, but that you had to be careful who you trusted with your heart and your secrets. She'd lived through the Depression, through wars, through the death of her husband and 2 of her children, She'd been careful with money, careful with trust. If she'd really left me an inheritance, she would have told me. She would have explained it, made sure I understood. The fact that I'd never known about it meant something was very wrong. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The next morning, Sarah met me at First National Trust and Savings. The bank was downtown, in one of those imposing stone buildings that had been there since the 1920s. Inside, the marble floors and high ceilings made every whisper echo like a shout. We met with the account manager, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who looked like she'd been working at the bank since it opened. She pulled up my account on her computer and frowned. "This is very unusual," she said, studying the screen. "Mrs. Martinez, when this account was opened, it was done with all the proper documentation. Driver's license, social security card, birth certificate. But looking at your signature on file," she pulled out a signature card and compared it to the one I'd just signed. "They didn't match. Not even close. Someone has been impersonating you," she said quietly. "This is identity theft on a massive scale." Sarah leaned forward. "Who opened this account? Do you have security footage, documentation of the person who came in?" "This account was opened 15 years ago," Patricia said. "Our security footage doesn't go back that far. But we do have the original paperwork." She disappeared into the back room and returned with a thick file. Inside were copies of identification documents, a driver's license, social security card, and birth certificate, all bearing my name and information. But the photo on the driver's license wasn't me. It was my sister Carmen. Sarah and I exchanged glances. "Mrs. Holloway," Sarah said carefully, "we need copies of all of this documentation. This is evidence of a serious crime. Of course, I'll also need to freeze this account immediately and report this to our fraud department." As we left the bank, my head was spinning. Carmen had been stealing from our family's inheritance for 15 years, using my identity to do it. She'd taken nearly $500,000, and now she was trying to get more by claiming I'd been hiding the money from them. "Rebecca," Sarah said as we stood on the sidewalk outside the bank, "this is bigger than family drama. This is federal fraud. We need to report this to the FBI." "But she's my sister," I said weakly. "Your sister has been stealing from you and your family for 15 years. She's committed identity theft, bank fraud, and probably tax evasion. This isn't about family anymore. This is about justice." That afternoon, we went to the FBI field office in Portland. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh listened to our story with growing interest, especially when we showed her the bank documents and the forged identification. "Mrs. Martinez," she said, "what you're describing is a sophisticated, long-term fraud scheme. If your sister has been doing this to your family, she's probably done it to others as well. We'll need to investigate this thoroughly." "What does that mean for me?" I asked. "It means you're a victim, not a criminal. But it also means this is going to get complicated. Your family is going to be angry when they find out what's really been happening." Agent Walsh was right. 2 days later, Carmen called me again, this time with Miguel and their lawyer on a conference call. "Rebecca, we've been patient, but our patience is running out. We know about the money, and we know you've been hiding it from us. Either you agree to split the inheritance fairly, or we're taking you to court." "Carmen," I said, choosing my words carefully, "I've been investigating the bank account you showed me. There are some serious irregularities." "What kind of irregularities?" Brennan asked. "The kind that involves the FBI," I said quietly. The line went silent. Then Carmen's voice, tight with anger. "Are you threatening us, Rebecca?" "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just saying that this situation is more complicated than any of us realized." "You have 1 week," Miguel said. 1 week to agree to a fair split of the inheritance, or we file a lawsuit demanding everything. The house, the business, everything Daniel left you. If you've been stealing from us, we're going to make sure you pay for it." After they hung up, I sat in my empty house, surrounded by the life Daniel and I had built together. The photos on the mantle showed our happy years. Vacations, anniversaries, quiet moments that had meant everything to me. Now it all felt fragile, like it could disappear at any moment. Peace. Agent Walsh called me the next morning. "Mrs. Martinez, we've started our investigation into your sister's activities. What we've found so far is disturbing. This isn't just about your grandmother's inheritance. Your sister has been involved in a much larger scheme." "What do you mean?" "We found evidence that she's been using multiple identities to access trust funds and inheritance accounts. Your case isn't isolated. She's been doing this for years, targeting elderly people and their families." My heart sank. "How many people has she hurt?" "We're still investigating, but it looks like she's stolen over $2 million from various sources." "Your grandmother's trust was just one of many. The week my family had given me was almost up. I knew they were serious about the lawsuit. Carmen had never made an idle threat in her life. But now I also knew the truth about what she'd been doing, and I had the evidence to prove it." I called Sarah and told her I was ready to face whatever came next. "If they want to take me to court," I said, "then that's where we'll settle this. But I'm not going to let them destroy everything Daniel and I built based on Carmen's lies. Rebecca, when we go to court, we're going to have to reveal everything. The FBI investigation, the evidence of fraud, all of it. Your family is going to be shocked." "They should be shocked," I said. "They've been lied to for 15 years. They deserve to know the truth." The lawsuit was filed on a Friday. Carmen and Miguel were demanding half of everything I owned, claiming that I'd been keeping their inheritance from them. They wanted the house, half the value of my business, and damages for the pain and suffering I'd caused by hiding the money. Looking at the legal documents, I felt a strange sense of calm. For months I'd been carrying the weight of their accusations, wondering if somehow I'd done something wrong. Now I knew the truth, and I had the evidence to prove it. That cheat or die. The court date was set for 3 weeks away. As I marked it on my calendar, I thought about my grandmother, about the stories she used to tell me about standing up to bullies and fighting for what was right. She'd survived so much in her life, and she'd always said that the truth had a way of coming out, even when people tried to bury it. I had no idea that when I walked into that courtroom, I'd be carrying more than just evidence of Carmen's fraud. I had no idea that the document in my manila envelope would change everything, not just for my family but for dozens of other families who'd been victimized by the same scheme. The truth was bigger than I'd imagined, and it was about to explode in a way that would make headlines across the country. The morning of the court hearing arrived with an unseasonably cold October wind that rattled the windows of the Multnomah County Courthouse. I stood on the steps, clutching my briefcase and the manila envelope that contained 15 years of lies wrapped in legal documents. Sarah Chen walked beside me, her expression grim but determined. "Remember, Rebecca," she said as we approached the heavy oak doors, "let me handle the legal arguments. When Judge Harrison asks you to speak, stick to the facts. Don't let your emotions take over, no matter what Carmen or Miguel say." Inside the courthouse, the marble halls echoed with the footsteps of lawyers, defendants, and families caught in their own legal battles. Our case was scheduled for Courtroom 4B, and as we made our way through the corridors, I spotted them before they saw me. Carmen sat on a bench outside the courtroom, dressed in a conservative black suit that made her look like a grieving widow rather than the woman who'd been systematically stealing from her own family for over a decade. Miguel paced nearby, his nervous energy filling the space around him. Their lawyer, Thomas Brennan, stood with his back to us, speaking in hushed tones on his phone. When Carmen finally looked up and saw me, her expression shifted from nervous anticipation to something harder, more calculating. She'd always been good at reading people, at knowing exactly what buttons to push. But today, I wasn't the same grieving widow she'd manipulated 6 months ago. "Rebecca," she said, standing up and smoothing down her skirt, "I hope you've come to your senses. It's not too late to settle this outside of court." "The time for settling was 15 years ago," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "When you first started stealing from our family." Miguel stopped pacing and turned to face me. "Stealing? Rebecca, we're trying to get back what's rightfully ours. What you've been hiding from us." "What I've been hiding?" The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "Miguel, do you have any idea what your sister has really been doing?" Before anyone could respond, the courtroom doors opened and a bailiff called our case. Martinez Family Trust Dispute, Judge Harrison presiding. Judge Amanda Harrison was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a severe bun and glasses that made her dark eyes seem even more penetrating. She'd been on the bench for over 20 years, and according to Sarah, She had a reputation for getting to the truth quickly and without tolerance for games. "Good morning," Judge Harrison said as we all took our seats. "I've reviewed the preliminary filings in this case. Ms. Chen, you represent the defendant, Rebecca Martinez?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Brennan, you represent the plaintiffs, Carmen Rodriguez and Miguel Martinez?" "Correct, Your Honor." "Mr. Brennan, please present your case." Brennan stood up, his confidence filling the room like expensive cologne. "Your Honor, this case is about family, trust, and an inheritance that was meant to be shared but has been hoarded by one individual for 15 years. He launched into his presentation, painting me as a cold, calculating woman who'd hidden our grandmother's inheritance from her siblings. He showed bank statements, trust documents, and withdrawal records that painted a picture of someone who'd been systematically taking money that belonged to the entire family. The evidence is clear, Your Honor," Brennan continued, gesturing toward a stack of documents on his table. "Mrs. Martinez has been receiving monthly distributions from the Elena Martinez Memorial Trust for 15 years. Nearly $500,000 that should have been divided among all of Elena Martinez's grandchildren." Carmen took the stand first, her voice quivering with practiced emotion. "Your Honor, my grandmother Elena raised us after our parents got divorced. She was like a mother to all of us. When she died, we thought she'd left us a small inheritance, maybe enough to help with her funeral expenses. We never knew about the trust until we found these documents in our mother's attic." She dabbed at her eyes with the tissue. "We've been struggling, Your Honor. I'm a single mother with 3 children. Miguel lost his job during the pandemic. Meanwhile, our sister has been living comfortably, running her own business, owning a beautiful home. We just want what's fair." Miguel's testimony was shorter but equally emotional. He talked about his financial struggles, about losing his house, about feeling betrayed by the sister he'd trusted. His voice cracked when he described finding the trust documents and realizing that help had been available all along. "I just don't understand why she would keep this from us," he said, looking directly at me. "We're family, we're supposed to help each other." When it was Sarah's turn to present our case, she stood up slowly, her movements deliberate and controlled. "Your Honor, my client is indeed a victim in this case. But she's not the perpetrator. She's been victimized by the very people who are now accusing her of theft." Sarah approached the bench with a folder of documents. "What Mr. Brennan has presented to the court is accurate in terms of the existence of the trust and the bank account. However, he's failed to mention several crucial facts." She handed copies of documents to the judge, the court reporter, and Brennan's table. "First, the signature on the bank account opening documents doesn't match my client's signature. Second, the photo identification used to open the account shows Carmen Rodriguez, not Rebecca Martinez. Third, and most importantly, my client never received a single penny from this account." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of pages turning. Judge Harrison studied the documents carefully, her expression growing more serious with each page. "Ms. Chen, are you alleging that Mrs. Rodriguez committed identity theft?" "I'm not alleging it, Your Honor. I'm stating it as fact. Carmen Rodriguez has been using her sister's identity to access trust funds for 15 years. She's stolen over $400,000 from her own family's inheritance." Carmen shot to her feet. "That's a lie. I never." "Ms. Rodriguez, please sit down," Judge Harrison said firmly. "You'll have your chance to respond." But Carmen wasn't finished. "Your Honor, she's trying to turn this around on us. She's the one who's been keeping the money. She's the one who's been lying to us." "Ms. Rodriguez, sit down now, or I'll have you removed from this courtroom." Carmen sat down, but her face was flushed with anger. Brennan leaned over and whispered something to her, but she shook her head violently. Sarah continued her presentation, methodically laying out the evidence of the fraud. Bank records showing cash withdrawals that coincided with Carmen's known whereabouts. Wire transfers to accounts in Carmen's name. Credit card payments for luxury items that Carmen had been photographed wearing on social media. "Your Honor, this fraud goes beyond just the Elena Martinez Trust. My client has been cooperating with an FBI investigation that has uncovered a pattern of similar crimes." Judge Harrison's eyebrows rose. "An FBI investigation?" "Yes, Your Honor. Special Agent Jennifer Walsh is leading the investigation into what appears to be a sophisticated fraud scheme targeting elderly individuals and their families." "Is Agent Walsh available to testify?" She is, Your Honor. She's waiting outside the courtroom. Brennan jumped to his feet. Your Honor, I object. This is a civil matter regarding inheritance distribution. Federal criminal investigations have no bearing on this case. Mr. Brennan, if criminal fraud is involved, it absolutely has bearing on this case. Ms. Chen, please call Agent Walsh. When Agent Walsh entered the courtroom, the atmosphere changed completely. She was a tall woman in her 40s, with short auburn hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. She wore a dark blue suit and carried herself with the confidence of someone who'd testified in federal court dozens of times. After being sworn in, Agent Walsh began her testimony. Your Honor, the FBI has been investigating Carmen Rodriguez for the past 3 months as part of a larger investigation into inheritance fraud. Ms. Rodriguez is suspected of identity theft, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. She opened her own folder and began presenting evidence. We've identified at least 12 separate instances where Ms. Rodriguez has used false identities to access trust funds, inheritance accounts, and estate distributions. The total amount stolen exceeds $2 million. The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear Carmen's sharp intake of breath, could feel Miguel's shock radiating from across the room. The Elena Martinez Trust was just one of many targets, Agent Walsh continued. Ms. Rodriguez has been operating this scheme for over 20 years, targeting elderly individuals in nursing homes and assisted living facilities. She would gain their trust, learn about their financial situations, and then use that information to access their accounts after their deaths. Judge Harrison leaned forward. Agent Walsh, what is the current status of the investigation? We have obtained warrants for Ms. Rodriguez's arrest on multiple federal charges. We were waiting for this court hearing to conclude before executing those warrants. Carmen stood up again, her composure completely gone. This is insane. You can't believe this. Rebecca put them up to this. She's trying to frame me. Ms. Rodriguez, Judge Harrison said, her voice ice cold. You need to sit down and remain quiet, or I will have you arrested for contempt of court. But Carmen was beyond reason now. Miguel, don't you see what's happening? She's been planning this. She's been working with the FBI to make us look like criminals. She's the one who's been stealing from us. Miguel looked confused and frightened. He kept looking back and forth between Carmen and me, as if he couldn't process what was happening. Brennan had gone completely pale. He leaned over to whisper something to Carmen, but she pushed him away. Your Honor, Sarah said, I have one more piece of evidence to present to the court. She approached the bench with the manila envelope I'd been carrying. This morning, Agent Walsh provided us with additional evidence that directly relates to this case. Judge Harrison took the envelope and opened it carefully. As she read the documents inside, her expression grew even more grave. Miss Chen, what am I looking at? Your Honor, that's a confession letter written by Carmen Rodriguez 2 days ago. She wrote it after FBI agents executed a search warrant at her home and found evidence of the fraud scheme. The courtroom erupted. Carmen screamed, That's not possible. I never wrote any confession. Miguel jumped up. Carmen, what is she talking about? What confession? Judge Harrison slammed her gavel. Order! Everyone sit down and remain quiet. But Carmen was beyond control now. This is all fake. They're framing me. Rebecca, tell them the truth. Tell them you've been keeping the money. Agent Walsh stood up. Your Honor, I need to interrupt these proceedings. Carmen Rodriguez, you're under arrest for federal fraud charges. The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before chaos erupted. Carmen started screaming. Miguel began shouting questions, and Brennan was frantically trying to restore order. But through it all, I felt a strange sense of calm. For 6 months, I'd been carrying the weight of their accusations, wondering if somehow I'd done something wrong. Now watching federal agents place handcuffs on Carmen's wrists, I finally understood what my grandmother had meant when she used to say that the truth always finds a way to surface. Carmen looked at me as the agents led her toward the courtroom door. Her face was a mask of rage and desperation. This isn't over, Rebecca. You think you've won, but this isn't over. Miguel collapsed back into his chair, his face in his hands. I don't understand, he kept saying. I don't understand what's happening. Judge Harrison waited until Carmen had been removed from the courtroom before speaking again. Mr. Brennan, I'm dismissing all claims against Mrs. Martinez. Based on the evidence presented, it's clear that your client's allegations were based on fraudulent information. She turned to me. Mrs. Martinez, I want to apologize on behalf of this court. You've been put through an ordeal that no one should have to endure, especially from family members. Thank you, Your Honor, I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Furthermore, the judge continued, I'm ordering that all of Mrs. Martinez's legal fees be paid from any recovered assets from the fraud investigation. This case is dismissed. As the gavel fell, I felt something inside me break loose. Not break apart, but break free. The fear, the doubt, the guilt I'd been carrying for months suddenly lifted, and I could breathe again. Outside the courtroom, Miguel approached me hesitantly. His face was pale, and he looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. Rebecca, he said softly, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what Carmen was doing. I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception, but all I saw was genuine shock and remorse. Miguel, did you ever receive any money from Carmen? Any payments or gifts that seemed too generous? He shook his head. No, never. She always said she was struggling financially. She would ask to borrow money from me sometimes, but she never gave me anything. Agent Walsh approached us. Mr. Martinez, we're going to need to interview you as part of our investigation. You're not suspected of any wrongdoing, but you may have information that could help us understand the full scope of your sister's crimes. Miguel nodded numbly. Whatever you need, I just can't believe this is happening. As we walked out of the courthouse, the October wind had died down, and the sun was breaking through the clouds. Sarah walked beside me, carrying her briefcase and shaking her head in amazement. In 20 years of practice, she said, I've never seen anything quite like that. Your sister wasn't just stealing from your family, she was running a criminal enterprise. What happens now? I asked. Now the federal prosecutors take over. Carmen will likely face decades in prison if she's convicted on all charges. The FBI will work to recover as much of the stolen money as possible, though I have to warn you, a lot of it may be gone. I nodded. The money had never really been the point. The point was the truth, and the truth was finally out. That evening, I sat in my living room, surrounded by the familiar comfort of the life Daniel and I had built together. The photos on the mantel seemed to smile down at me, and for the first time in months, I felt like I could smile back. Bell. My phone rang. It was Agent Walsh. Mrs. Martinez. I wanted to let you know that we've executed additional warrants based on evidence we found at your sister's house. We've identified at least 30 more victims of her fraud scheme. 30 more families who'd been betrayed, who'd lost money meant for their children, their futures, their security. Agent Walsh, I said, whatever you need from me to help those families, I'm willing to do it. Thank you, Mrs. Martinez. Your cooperation has been invaluable. There is one more thing, though. We found something at your sister's house that I think you should know about. What is it? A letter from your grandmother. A real letter, written before she died. It explains why she set up the trust, why she chose you as the beneficiary. My breath caught. What does it say? She wrote that she knew you were the only one who visited her out of love rather than obligation. She wanted to make sure you were taken care of, but she also wanted to protect you from family members who might try to take advantage of your generous nature. I closed my eyes, feeling tears on my cheeks. Even from beyond the grave, Grandma Elena had been trying to protect me. She also wrote, Agent Walsh continued, that she hoped someday you'd be able to help other families who were being taken advantage of by people they trusted. As I hung up the phone, I thought about those 30 families, about the pain and betrayal they must be feeling. I thought about the inheritance that was rightfully mine, money that could help them rebuild their lives. And I thought about my grandmother, who'd survived so much hardship and still believed in the power of family, real family, the kind built on love and trust rather than greed and manipulation. The truth had finally come out, just as she'd always promised it would. But the story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning. 3 weeks after Carmen's arrest, I found myself in a conference room at the FBI field office, surrounded by manila folders, computer screens, and the faces of people whose lives had been shattered by my sister's greed. Agent Walsh had asked me to attend a victim impact meeting, where families affected by Carmen's fraud scheme could share their stories and learn about the recovery process. The first person to speak was Harold Brennan, an elderly man in his 70s whose wife had died 6 months earlier. His hands shook as he held a photograph of a smiling woman with gray hair and kind eyes. Margaret was in the Sunset Manor nursing home for 2 years before she passed, he said, his voice barely audible. Carmen worked there as a volunteer, helping with activities. She was so kind to Margaret, always bringing her flowers, sitting with her when I couldn't visit. He paused, wiping his eyes with a crumpled tissue. Margaret had set up a trust for our grandchildren's education. $50,000 she'd saved from her teacher's pension. Carmen somehow got access to it all. Our granddaughter Emily was supposed to start college this fall. The room was silent except for the soft sound of tissues being pulled from boxes. I felt sick knowing that Carmen had used the same tactics on dozens of families, earning their trust only to steal their futures. Mrs. Patricia Novak spoke next, a woman in her 60s, whose mother had been another of Carmen's victims. Mom was so proud of her independence. She lived alone until she was 85, then moved to assisted living. Carmen befriended her, convinced her that I was trying to steal her money. By the time Mom died, Carmen had drained her entire life savings, $120,000. The stories continued for over an hour. Elderly victims who'd lost their retirement funds. Families who'd lost inheritance money meant for children's education, medical bills, or keeping family homes. Carmen had been methodical, targeting vulnerable people and their families with surgical precision. Agent Walsh finally stood up, her expression grim. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to know that we've made significant progress in this case. Carmen Rodriguez has been charged with 43 counts of federal fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy. She's currently being held without bail. She turned to me. Mrs. Martinez, would you like to share what you've decided about the recovered funds? I stood up, my legs unsteady. 3 weeks of sleepless nights had led to this moment. I've spoken with my attorney about the Elena Martinez Trust Fund. While legally the money belongs to me, I've decided to donate the majority of it to a victim compensation fund. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. Harold Brennan looked up at me with tears in his eyes. The trust contains approximately $470,000, I continued. I'm keeping $50,000 to cover legal expenses and to set up a small emergency fund for my family. The remaining $420,000 will be divided among all of Carmen's victims based on their losses. Patricia Novak stood up. Mrs. Martinez, you don't have to do this. That money is rightfully yours. No, I said firmly. My grandmother left me that money to help family, and every person in this room has been hurt by someone who was supposed to be family. You're all more deserving of this money than I am. After the meeting, Agent Walsh walked me to my car. The November rain had started again, turning the parking lot into a mirror of gray clouds and streetlights. Rebecca, what you're doing is incredibly generous, but are you sure about this decision? You've been through hell because of your sister's actions. Agent Walsh, I spent months thinking I'd done something wrong, that somehow I'd stolen from my own family. The relief of knowing the truth is worth more than any amount of money. She nodded thoughtfully. There's something else you should know. We've been in contact with the prosecutor's office. Carmen's lawyer approached them about a plea deal. My heart sank. What kind of plea deal? She's offering to provide information about other fraud schemes in exchange for a reduced sentence. Apparently, she wasn't working alone. The drive home gave me time to process this new information. Carmen hadn't just been stealing from families. She'd been part of a larger criminal network. How many other people were involved? How many other families had been victimized? Called. When I got home, I found Miguel sitting on my front porch. He looked terrible, unshaven, wearing the same clothes I'd seen him in days earlier, his eyes red from lack of sleep. Miguel, what are you doing here? I've been trying to figure out how I could have been so blind, he said, not looking at me. Carmen was my sister too. I should have known something was wrong. I sat down beside him on the porch steps. Miguel, you were a victim too. Carmen lied to all of us. But you figured it out. You found the truth. Only because Agent Walsh and Sarah helped me. Only because I got lucky and had good people on my side. Miguel finally looked at me, his face etched with guilt and confusion. Rebecca, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What is it? Over the years, Carmen would sometimes pay for things for my family. Dinner at expensive restaurants, clothes for the kids, even help with my mortgage a few times. She always said she'd gotten a bonus at work or that her boyfriend was helping her out. Was she using stolen money to help me? The question hung in the air between us. I could see the fear in his eyes, the terror that he might have unknowingly benefited from Carmen's crimes. Miguel, the FBI is tracking all the money. If you received any of it unknowingly, that doesn't make you a criminal. It makes you another victim. But what if the families she stole from think I was involved? What if they think I knew? Then we'll tell them the truth. We'll show them that you were manipulated just like everyone else. We sat in silence for a while, watching the rain create small rivers in the gutters. Finally, Miguel spoke again. I'm thinking about moving away from Portland, starting over somewhere else. This whole thing has destroyed my reputation, my job prospects. People look at me differently now. Miguel, running away won't solve anything. The FBI cleared you of any wrongdoing. Agent Walsh told me herself that you're considered a victim, not a suspect. Maybe, but I still feel responsible. I should have questioned where Carmen was getting her money. I should have been more suspicious when she was suddenly able to help us financially. You trusted your sister. That's not a crime, Miguel. That's what family is supposed to do. He laughed bitterly. Family. Carmen destroyed that word for me. How am I supposed to trust anyone again? How am I supposed to explain this to my children? I thought about Daniel, about the conversations we'd had about my family over the years. He'd always been skeptical of Carmen's motives, but he'd never pushed me to cut ties with her. He'd understood that family relationships are complicated, that love and loyalty don't disappear just because someone disappoints you. Miguel, what Carmen did doesn't define what family means. It defines who Carmen is. You and I were still family. We're still connected by more than just blood. How can you say that after everything that's happened? I accused you of stealing from us. I was ready to take everything you owned, because you were lied to by someone you trusted. Because you believed what any reasonable person would believe when presented with evidence. I don't blame you for that. Miguel started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside him. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. I'm so sorry for what we put you through. I put my arm around his shoulders, feeling the weight of his grief and guilt. Miguel, we're going to get through this, both of us. But we have to stick together. 2 days later, Agent Walsh called with an update that changed everything. Rebecca, Carmen's plea negotiations have revealed something significant. She's provided us with information about a much larger fraud network operating across multiple states. What kind of network? It's called the Legacy Project. It's a sophisticated operation targeting inheritance and trust fund recipients. Carmen was just one of dozens of operatives working for this organization. My blood ran cold. How long has this been going on? Based on Carmen's information, at least 10 years. Possibly longer. They've stolen an estimated $15 million from hundreds of families. $15 million? Rebecca, your case was the key that broke this whole thing open. Because you fought back, because you didn't accept their version of events, we've been able to identify and arrest 12 other members of this network. The magnitude of what Agent Walsh was telling me was overwhelming. Carmen hadn't just been a greedy sister stealing from her family. She'd been part of a criminal enterprise that had destroyed hundreds of lives. Agent Walsh, what happens now? Now we build cases against all of them. And Rebecca, we're going to need your help. You're one of the few victims who successfully fought back. Your testimony could be crucial in prosecuting the leaders of this organization. That evening, I called Sarah Chen to discuss the implications of testifying in federal court against a criminal organization. The conversation was sobering. Rebecca, if you agree to testify, you'll become a key witness in one of the largest fraud cases in Oregon history. That comes with certain risks. What kind of risks? The people behind the Legacy Project have a lot to lose. They might try to intimidate witnesses, discredit your testimony, or worse. Sarah, if my testimony can help put these people in prison and prevent other families from going through what we went through, then I have to do it. I understand your motivation, but we need to think about your safety. The FBI will provide protection, but your life is going to change significantly. I thought about the faces in that conference room, about Harold Brennan holding his wife's photograph, about Patricia Novak's mother, who'd been convinced that her own daughter was trying to steal from her. I thought about Emily, Harold's granddaughter, who couldn't go to college because Carmen had stolen her education fund. Sarah, my life already changed when Carmen decided to steal from our family. At least now I have a chance to make something positive come from all this pain. The next morning, I called Agent Walsh and agreed to testify as a key witness in the federal prosecution of the Legacy Project. Within hours, 2 federal marshals arrived at my house to discuss security protocols and witness protection procedures. Mrs. Martinez, Marshal David Torres explained, your testimony is crucial to this case, but we need to take your safety seriously. We'll be providing 24-hour protection until the trials are concluded. How long will that take? Could be 2 years, maybe longer. This is a complex case with multiple defendants. Each one is entitled to their own trial unless they agree to be tried together. 2 years of protection. 2 years of looking over my shoulder, of having my every movement monitored and planned. But also 2 years of knowing that justice was finally being served. That afternoon, Miguel came by to check on me. When he saw the federal marshals outside, his face went pale. Rebecca, what's happening? Are you in danger? I explained about the Legacy Project, about my agreement to testify, about the scope of the criminal enterprise that Carmen had been part of. Miguel sat down heavily in my kitchen chair. So Carmen wasn't just stealing from us. She was part of something much bigger. Much bigger. Miguel, there are hundreds of families who have been victimized by this organization. Hundreds of people who lost money meant for their children, their retirement, their futures. And you're going to testify against all of them? I'm going to tell the truth about what happened to our family. If that helps convict the people responsible, then yes. Miguel was quiet for a long time. Finally, he looked up at me with something I hadn't seen in his eyes since Carmen's arrest. Respect. Rebecca, I want to help. Whatever you need, whatever the FBI needs from me, I want to help bring these people to justice. Miguel, you don't have to do this. You've been through enough. No, I do have to do this. Carmen used me to get to you, to make her lies more believable. She manipulated me into attacking my own sister. I need to make that right. 6 months later, I stood in federal court, surrounded by defendants, lawyers, FBI agents, and victims. The Legacy Project trial had become national news, with reporters covering every day of testimony. Carmen sat at the defendant's table, refusing to look at me as I was sworn in to testify. Mrs. Martinez, the prosecutor began, please tell the court how you first became aware that someone was stealing from your family's inheritance. As I began my testimony, I thought about my grandmother Elena, about the stories she used to tell me about fighting for what was right, even when it was difficult. I thought about Daniel, about how proud he would have been to see me standing up not just for myself, but for all the families who'd been victimized by the Legacy Project. And I thought about Harold Brennan's granddaughter Emily, who was now able to attend college thanks to the Victim Compensation Fund. She'd sent me a letter thanking me for my courage, telling me that my actions had restored her faith in the possibility of justice. The truth had finally come out, just as my grandmother had always promised it would. But more than that, the truth was making a difference in the lives of people I'd never met, people who'd been hurt by the same criminal enterprise that had nearly destroyed my family. As I finished my testimony and walked out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Daniel's death, a sense of purpose, a feeling that my pain had been transformed into something meaningful. Carmen and 11 other defendants were eventually convicted and sentenced to a combined total of over 200 years in federal prison. The Legacy Project was dismantled, and new laws were passed to protect elderly individuals and their families from inheritance fraud. But the most important outcome wasn't the convictions or the new legislation. It was the restoration of hope for hundreds of families who'd thought they would never see justice. It was the knowledge that sometimes, when you refuse to accept lies as truth, you can change not just your own life, but the lives of countless others. My grandmother had been right about family, about truth, and about the power of standing up for what's right. She'd also been right about something else, that the greatest inheritance you can leave behind isn't money, but the courage to fight for justice when it matters most. 5 years have passed since that cold October morning when I walked into Judge Harrison's courtroom with a manila envelope that would change everything. As I write this, I'm sitting in my home office, the same room where Carmen first confronted me about the inheritance that would expose her web of lies. But everything else has changed in ways I never could have imagined. The Legacy Project trials concluded 18 months ago, with convictions for all 14 defendants. Carmen received the harshest sentence, 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. The judge called her crimes a systematic betrayal of the most vulnerable members of our society, and noted that her actions had, quote, destroyed the financial security of hundreds of families across multiple generations. I attended every day of her sentencing hearing, not out of vindictiveness, but because I needed to see justice completed. When the judge read the sentence, Carmen finally looked at me across the courtroom. For just a moment, I saw something in her eyes that might have been regret, but then she turned away, and I knew that whatever sister I'd once believed existed had been an illusion all along. The financial recovery process took nearly 3 years to complete. The FBI's asset forfeiture team worked tirelessly to trace money through dozens of accounts, shell companies, and investment vehicles. In the end, they recovered approximately $12 million of the $15 million that had been stolen. The Elena Martinez Memorial Trust Fund that I donated became the foundation for a much larger victim compensation program that helped 347 families recover at least partial restitution. Harold Brennan's granddaughter Emily graduated from college last spring with a degree in social work. She sent me a photo from her graduation ceremony, smiling in her cap and gown, with a note that read, "Thank you for giving me back my future." Harold himself passed away 2 years ago, but he lived long enough to see Emily start college, and to know that his wife Margaret's sacrifice hadn't been in vain. Patricia Novak used her recovered funds to establish a foundation that provides legal assistance to elderly individuals who've been victimized by financial fraud. She calls it the Margaret Novak Defense Fund, named after her mother. Last year, they helped over 200 families navigate the complex process of reporting elder financial abuse. Miguel has become one of my closest allies in the ongoing fight against inheritance fraud. After the trials ended, he used his background in construction management to start a nonprofit organization that helps elderly homeowners protect themselves from contractor fraud and other scams targeting seniors. He's remarried now, a wonderful woman named Linda who shares his passion for protecting vulnerable people. Rebecca, he told me at his wedding reception, losing Carmen was the worst thing that ever happened to our family. But finding out who you really are was the best thing. The irony isn't lost on me that Carmen's betrayal ultimately brought Miguel and me closer together than we'd ever been as children. Real family, I've learned, isn't determined by genetics or shared history. It's built through trust, loyalty, and the willingness to stand by each other when everything falls apart. My accounting practice has evolved significantly since the trials. I now specialize in forensic accounting for fraud cases, working closely with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies to unravel complex financial crimes. The skills I developed investigating Carmen's theft have become my professional calling. Last month, I helped expose a Ponzi scheme that had stolen over $8 million from retirees across the Pacific Northwest. Agent Jennifer Walsh and I have maintained a professional relationship that's grown into genuine friendship. She's since been promoted to head the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit for the Western region, and she often calls me when they encounter inheritance fraud cases that require specialized expertise. Rebecca, she told me recently over coffee, your case changed how we investigate these crimes. Before the Legacy Project prosecution, inheritance fraud was treated as isolated incidents. Now we understand that these operations are often part of larger criminal enterprises, with sophisticated networks and resources. The ripple effects of our case extended far beyond individual prosecutions. Congress passed the Elderly Financial Protection Act, which requires banks to implement enhanced verification procedures for large withdrawals from trust accounts and inheritance funds. Several states have created specialized courts for elder abuse cases, staffed with judges trained to recognize the signs of financial exploitation. But perhaps the most meaningful change has been personal. 3 years ago, I received a letter from a woman named Catherine Walsh, no relation to Agent Walsh, whose mother had been victimized by a scheme similar to Carmen's. Catherine had read about our case in the news and reached out for advice on how to fight back against the people who'd stolen her family's inheritance. "Mrs. Martinez," she wrote, "your story gave me hope that justice is possible even when your own family turns against you. My brother has been stealing from our mother's estate for years, and I didn't know how to prove it until I read about your case." I spent hours on the phone with Catherine, walking her through the process of gathering evidence, working with law enforcement, and preparing for the emotional trauma of exposing a family member's crimes. Her case eventually led to her brother's conviction and the recovery of over $300,000 in stolen funds. Catherine's letter was the first of many. Over the past 5 years, I've received correspondence from hundreds of people whose families have been torn apart by inheritance fraud, elder abuse, and financial exploitation. Each letter tells a similar story: trust betrayed, evidence hidden, families destroyed by greed and deception. I've started responding to these letters personally, offering guidance and connecting people with resources that can help them fight back. What began as individual responses has grown into something much larger. With Miguel's help, I've established the Elena Martinez Foundation, which provides legal assistance, forensic accounting services, and emotional support to families dealing with inheritance fraud. The foundation's work has taken me to places I never expected to go. Last year, I testified before a Senate committee about the need for stronger federal protections against elder financial abuse. I've spoken at conferences across the country, sharing our story and teaching other professionals how to recognize the signs of inheritance fraud. But the most rewarding work happens on a smaller scale. Like the phone call I received last month from a man whose sister had been stealing from their father's trust fund, or the email from a daughter who discovered that her stepmother had been forging her father's signature on financial documents. These families are facing the same bewilderment, betrayal, and fear that I experienced when Carmen first confronted me about the inheritance money. The hardest part, I tell them, isn't proving the fraud. It's accepting that someone you loved and trusted has been lying to you for years. But once you accept that truth, you can start fighting for justice. The Elena Martinez Foundation has helped recover over $4 million in stolen inheritance funds across 23 states. We've provided free forensic accounting services to 156 families and connected hundreds more with legal resources and law enforcement assistance. But the statistics don't capture the real impact. The college funds restored, the retirement savings recovered, the family legacies preserved. Sometimes people ask me if I regret donating most of my grandmother's inheritance to help other families. The answer is always no. That money was meant to provide security and opportunity, and it's done exactly that. Just for far more people than my grandmother ever could have imagined. I kept Daniel's life insurance money and used it to buy a small cabin in the mountains outside Portland. It's become my retreat, a place where I go to write and think and remember the life we built together before everything changed. The walls are covered with photos, not just of Daniel and me, but of all the families we've helped through the foundation. There's Emily at her college graduation, Harold Brennan smiling beside her. There's Miguel and Linda on their wedding day, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. There are dozens of other faces, people I've never met in person, but whose lives have been touched by the work that grew out of our family's tragedy. Last week, I received a letter that brought everything full circle. It was from Carmen, written from her federal prison cell in Colorado. After 5 years of silence, she'd finally decided to reach out. "Rebecca," the letter began, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness or your understanding. But I need you to know that I'm sorry for what I did to you, to Miguel, to all the families I hurt." She went on to explain that she'd been attending therapy sessions in prison, working to understand how she'd become capable of such betrayal. She wrote about the guilt she carried, knowing that her actions had destroyed so many lives. She asked if there was any way she could help with the foundation's work, perhaps by providing information about other fraud schemes she'd learned about during her years with the Legacy Project. I read the letter 3 times before putting it aside. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let Carmen face the consequences of her choices without any involvement from me. But another part, the part that sounded like my grandmother's voice, reminded me that forgiveness isn't about excusing someone's actions. It's about freeing yourself from the burden of carrying their guilt. I wrote back to Carmen, not to offer forgiveness, but to acknowledge her apology and to let her know about the foundation. I told her about the families we'd helped, about the legislation that had been passed, about the positive changes that had grown from the wreckage of her crimes. Carmen, I wrote, I can't forget what you did, and I can't pretend that your apology erases the harm you caused. But if you genuinely want to help other families avoid what we went through, then I'm willing to listen to what information you can provide. Her response came quickly. Over the next several months, Carmen provided detailed information about dozens of other fraud schemes she'd learned about through the Legacy Project network. Her intelligence helped law enforcement agencies across the country identify new cases, arrest additional perpetrators, and recover millions more in stolen funds. It wasn't redemption. Some acts can't be undone, some trust can't be rebuilt. But it was something, a small step toward making amends for the damage she'd caused. Today marks the 5th anniversary of that courtroom confrontation that changed everything. I'm planning to visit my grandmother's grave this afternoon, to tell her about the foundation that bears her name and the hundreds of families we've helped. I want to tell her that her trust in me wasn't misplaced, that the inheritance she left has grown into something far more valuable than money. Miguel and I have plans to visit Harold Brennan's grave as well. His granddaughter Emily will meet us there, along with several other beneficiaries of the Victim Compensation Fund. We've started a tradition of gathering each year on this date, not to dwell on the past, but to celebrate the resilience of families who refuse to let criminals steal their futures. As I prepare to leave for the cemetery, I think about the manila envelope that started it all. Such a small thing to contain such explosive truth, but that's often how justice works. Not through grand gestures or dramatic revelations, but through ordinary people who refuse to accept lies as truth, who insist on digging deeper when something doesn't feel right. The phone rings as I'm putting on my coat. It's Agent Walsh, calling with news about a new case that might benefit from our foundation's expertise. Another family has been victimized, another criminal enterprise has been uncovered, another opportunity to turn tragedy into justice. I'll be right there, I tell her, grabbing my keys and my briefcase. The work continues, and there are more families who need someone to stand with them when their world falls apart. Walking out of my house, I pause to look back at the life I've built from the ashes of betrayal. It's not the life I planned when Daniel and I first moved to Portland, dreaming of quiet years running our small business and growing old together. But it's a good life, a meaningful life, a life that honors the memory of everyone who believed in the power of truth to overcome deception. My grandmother always said that family is about more than blood. It's about the people who stand by you when everything else falls apart. She was right, as she was about so many things. The family I've built through this work, the connections I've made with other survivors, the relationships I've developed with people fighting the same battles. This is what real family looks like. And somewhere in all of this, I found something I thought I'd lost forever when Daniel died. A sense of purpose, a reason to get up each morning, a belief that one person's courage can make a difference in the lives of many. The truth did set us free, just as my grandmother promised it would, but more than that, it set hundreds of other families free as well. And that, I think, is the greatest inheritance of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now, and hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.